All right, so this is going to be episode number 2 of the podcast here, maybe number 3, not sure. But this is with Dave Strength and Kindness. This is Dr. Dave Hagerty of Dave Strength and Kindness. You can find him on Instagram at dave.strengthandkindness and then on YouTube at Strength and Kindness. We had a really great conversation here. We went pretty deep, looking mainly on the mindset side, lifestyle side, spirituality side, as well as training side of everything related to movement, pain, and just having a better overall life. So hopefully you guys will love this episode. I know I had a really good time making it. And yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and cut right to our podcast. All right, we have official episode number 2, I believe, which puts me in the top 5% of podcasters, I think, make it to 2 episodes. So here
That's
we are.
that's awesome. Good to know. If I get mine going, I only have to get to 2.
Yeah, so but you've got a 52 video goal for YouTube this year, right?
Yeah, yeah. A video that's not a short, because I do shorts. I'm making more shorts, but a video that's like 5 to 10 minutes a week. So
Gotcha. Well, good luck, man. How are those going so far for you?
they're fun. Like I probably gonna just beat the same drum over over the course of the next 52 weeks, because I'll probably just get back into like models of training that aren't, just do this exercise for glute growth. But maybe I get back into some of that stuff. And the thing about all this from a like business or physical therapy or training standpoint is like you're not going to get any better at any of it if you don't jump in and start doing, right? So that's really the goal, is to do it and learn and keep the process going. So yeah.
Yeah, I figured we were probably going to riff on this exact point at some point, if not right away. Um, because like right now you're doing a challenge that it's a reset,
Yeah,
and what is the strength and kindness reset? Is that what you're calling it?
the strong and kind reset. Yeah.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I first of all, this is not the first challenge type thing that you've done. But I love following along with this and then listening to your explanation as to, what the intention is behind it. I think it's great. And I think more people could benefit from just taking a little bit of action consistently. And I think that's part of what this reset is about. So can you speak to it a little bit?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I appreciate you, paying attention to what I'm putting out. I pay attention to what you put out. And it really comes down to, okay, so this is, I do think challenges are super useful because there's a lot of clarity in challenges, right? And this is one of the things I've learned over the past few years. Humans need clarity, right? We need to know what to do, when to do it. But we also kind of immediately then get bound to those chains and we start to hate it, right? So January is an awesome month. There's a lot of new energy from beginning of the year. People try to change, right? And then things inevitably fall off course, right? And the biggest takeaways that I have gotten from developing a mindfulness or meditative practice are just to begin again. You're constantly being pulled, your attention, literally your attention, which unfortunately, this isn't stuff that's really taught to us very well. Like your attention is a commodity. And right now it's like the biggest commodity. And so learning that, oh man, I got really wrapped up in my thinking for the last 30 minutes, or I started scrolling TikTok and it's been 20 minutes, and learning that you can just pull yourself back. And you can do that without shame or guilt too, because that's the other thing that we color our feelings and emotions with, like, oh, I shouldn't have been on TikTok for 20 minutes. Well, maybe, but like, who cares, right? So it's just learning to separate like the kind of visceral and like tangible sensations of the world from the fact that if you pull back, like we have consciousness and then what's happening to us, or what we're responding to. And so the reset, the intention for this is, I think if you develop this practice, you're going to be a little bit calmer. Like not a lot calmer. Like I still get
Yeah,
mad at
yeah,
people.
yeah.
Like on the road, I'm still pissed off at people, but you'll get a little bit calmer. You'll like see things for what they are. Like your phone is just constantly like trying to get your attention, and marketers, me and you,
Yeah.
Greg, we're out there, we're trying to tell
Yeah,
people about stuff. And
that's right.
we're trying to get their attention, and that's not bad, but the more people understand like that they have some power there, and also that you're having like you can have a stress response just because of how you're thinking, and having a cumulative stress response can really run havoc on your body.
Yeah,
um
and I think there's, like, so many directions to go from this, of which I'm sure will go in all directions. But just to sort of bring it back for a second, so your background, you have your DPT, right? So you're a doctor of physical therapy.
mhm.
What is your background prior to, you know, becoming a DPT, all that? And then at what stage do you develop your mindfulness practice, and sort of what are the circumstances around you stepping into that or figuring that out? I'd be interested to hear of that, because this is not something I hear a lot of people talking about in our sort of niche, like the actual meditative practice, mindfulness. People allude to biopsychosocial model of health, but I find it's pretty rare that somebody has leaned in on the meditation mindfulness side in, like, actually like a structured way.
Yeah. So before I went to physical therapy school, I was coaching CrossFit, doing personal training. I was going to potentially go to medical school. Like I took the MCAT, I applied. I didn't get in right away. I'll always admit that I didn't get in right away, which is fine. I only applied to one school, and thank God I didn't, because I just realized now, like, that's not what I wanted. Right? It was kind of like it was attention seeking, or it was like glory seeking. It was
Mm.
kind of fixer oriented, right?
Yes.
um I honestly wanted to go to medical school though, and then like start a gym, kind of like barbell medicine esque type stuff, right? and um and then I realized, like, oh, that's not what I want to do. I was working on a neurosurgery floor as a nursing assistant technician. Working in the hospital, I really loved patient care in that setting. I also had like no pressure. So all I was trying to do was just be nice to people and do a decent job, like emptying bedpans, taking people to the
Oh,
bathroom,
gee.
and being comforting, right? And uh so then I got into physical therapy school. And the University of Iowa, where I attended, is one of the only curriculums at the time, which was 6 years ago, and it's still, I don't know what, if it's changed or not, but like we had a whole course devoted to pain science, right?
Mm.
A lot of it was like the cascade of effects from a like inflammatory cytokines type of situation, like at
Yeah.
the tissue level. But there was also at least some recognition that there was central sensitization going on, and then in combination with peripheral sensitization, which these are just basic ways for saying like there's sensitization of your brain and spinal cord, and like how you're interpreting what's going on, and then there's also tissue level sensitivity, right? And I think it was just an article about mindfulness based stress reduction from John Kabat-Zinn, and how he
Mm.
had implemented it with people who had, terminal illness or chronic pain, and how it had beneficial effects. And I was the exercise guy. I was the guy in class, like, well, everything's just exercise. Like, just freaking
Mm.
go exercise. And I wasn't super manual therapy oriented. I'm just like, it's just most of it's just be a good person and help the person, and then get them to move, because moving can feel good. But we had to do like a research project, and I did mine on using a meditation app in conjunction with physical therapy. And it was just it was a case study. But
Mm.
the woman I did it on, she had had chronic back pain and chronic leg pain for a long time, and she's like, yeah, this helps me. Like, it does help me. Like, it's not that I'm pain free, but it does make me realize that I have some power. And like, so that was kind of where a lot of this comes from. And I started meditating because I saw people doing CrossFit who would meditate before they like did their WOD, like not locally, but like
Yeah.
high level games competitors were like, yeah, I breathe for 10 minutes and it helps my performance. I'm like, well, what's that about? So I started trying, and it's kind of what gets us down these optimization type routes, because I don't think it's really about optimization. I think it's just about separating yourself from the emotions or the fears or the anxieties you're having a little bit, and then doing what you need to do.
Yeah, it is interesting. I almost conceptualize it in multiple ways. So, when you're having a pain experience, it's hard to know the difference between the sensation level experience itself, and then the emotional content and the thought-based content. And the less trained your mind is, the less equipped you are to be able to distinguish between those factors, right? And at least in my experience personally, when I was dealing with chronic widespread pain, it was like, no, there's nothing going on from a psycho-emotional standpoint that's affecting me. It's all driven from this pain. I didn't know that those things were, all part of the same global overall experience. And my entry point into working with my pain was biomedical.
Mhm.
Some tissue there's some structure, and then you get removed from that. And I think the people that are very mechanically oriented tend to go towards like, oh, well, then what's a slightly more holistic but still extremely mechanical representation of what's going on here? And that's sort of the rabbit hole that I went down after that. And then it was serendipitously getting into mindfulness. And then those initial sessions of, wow, is my brain really this chaotic of a place to be? I didn't even realize it because that's how out of touch I was with the various elements of my experience. And it was in being able to both, like you're saying, like kind of get this separation, a little bit of perspective. So I'm in the content level. Now all of a sudden I meditate, which I don't even know what's going on. I'm just listening to a guy say this, this, this. Okay, fine. Yeah, Sam. Sam Harris. I love his app.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you get a little bit of separation, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, what's that stuff?
Yeah.
Now it looks completely different than it was when it
Yeah.
was up this close, just by getting a little bit of distance. Now at the same time, the kind of paradox here, and I'd love to get your take on this, is that people that I talk to that get into meditation almost certainly usually start from the perspective of getting into it for the purpose of feeling better, right? Or like the example you gave was of optimizing performance, which I honestly think that's a better target. I'd
Yeah.
rather go for it from a performance standpoint and then have a residual effect be being calmer and feeling better. But a
Yeah.
lot of people go to it to alleviate pain or discomfort, whether that is physical or psychological. And in doing so, what their base intention is without recognizing it is that they're resisting their experience, which of course is antithetical to the practice itself, which is all about recognizing your experience without judgment, right?
Yeah.
So how do you view that paradox there? And if you're working with someone and they're just getting into the practice, do you have any practical tips or suggestions that help people bridge that gap?
I mean, you very much like it's almost so I want to go back to something and then we can come back to this in a second because
Cool.
you're a very good guitarist, correct? Or a celloist? What do you play?
Yeah, so I play upright bass. I mean, I'm pretty good at
Rubber
guitar,
bass. Yeah.
but yeah,
So
upright
like
bass.
you're very good. I've seen you perform and it's like, okay, so and then but you were having pain in association with performing and playing your instrument, correct?
Like, yep.
Like, and there's these deep things going on that like even if your life seems pretty good, if you're having pain with things that you enjoy, even if you don't identify it as scary or fear, like you're getting an emotional response about like, what if I can't play my instrument again? Even if you don't voice that aloud, right? And so, like, and then, circuits or neurons that wire together fire together. And so, like, this is one of the most profound things about it and the structural and functional aspects of meditation, changing how you like interpret how you're thinking and creating a little bit of space is so powerful is because then it really does lead you to see that okay, like pain can be a tissue thing, but we know within 7 to 10 days after an acute injury it starts to basically take hold and become more of a central nervous system like mediated thing, right? Especially like nociception and what we don't have to get into that too much,
Sure.
but like I think what it's just like exercise from the standpoint of like don't do it because it's going to fix you today, right?
Mm,
Don't even like do it because like the cumulative dose of it will allow you to do other things in your life that you value, right? Like, and you can train for the sake of training, and that's totally fine. The tricky thing about that is people who often just chase a
mhm,
number have less satisfaction than the people who are just showing up and doing what their body can tolerate that day and enjoying the process, right? And so it's that same general concept of like all you're trying to do. So I was in the midst of really, so I didn't use waking up until I was pretty much in the midst of like a pretty bad depressive and anxious episode.
Yeah, and just for everyone
And
else, waking up is the Sam Harris meditation app.
yes, waking up. And the reason that meditate, and I had used Calm and I had used Headspace, and I think both of those are fine apps, right? Like they do the job of teaching you and promoting this idea that distancing yourself from your thoughts and observing your emotions and stuff like that is powerful. But the way that waking up approached the neuroscientific aspects of things
Ah,
was pretty powerful for me, because it made me realize, like, oh, I was contributing to my own suffering, right? And that's painful, and you don't necessarily know why you're doing it, but it does give you at least a shimmer of like distance between, okay, there's an objective and there's a subjective, and then like honestly just becoming kind of this observer of what I'm doing is huge. And so it all kind of comes, and he also mentions early on, and that you do a good job of saying like, yeah, it's ethical to the practice, because really what you're trying to do is just not do anything, is just observe and just sit. And like that was like, oh, okay, don't try to fix this, just like let it pass. And if you've ever listened to any of John Kabat-Zinn's longer meditations, it's like, well, what he was doing was just giving people permission to just lay down and rest, and
yeah,
like poke into the sensations that they were afraid of and that had come to dominate their headspace, right? And and it helps people because they see
yeah,
like, okay, I can handle this, right? And that's what was pretty powerful to me.
yeah, and I think so there are a couple of things there to touch on. First of all, it's like, if you are that person out there who is not engaging in mindfulness because it seems a bit too woo-woo, getting into the neuroscience aspect of it, diving in and seeing what the available literature is something that could be really, really useful to bridge that gap between that thinking, problem-solving part of your brain that does wanna fix stuff and giving it a little bit of a nugget to chew on and say like, hey, here's a reason to maybe engage in this thing that feels a bit out of your comfort zone, right? Because I think we're both pretty scientifically oriented individuals. So when we get the neuroscience in front of us, it says, oh, actually, neural pathways are going to change the way they function and maybe over time even remodel, and certain areas of the brain are going to grow and certain ones are going to shrink, and things are going to wire together more strongly or more weakly in more favorable ways progressively over time if I do this practice. That's like something for us to hold on to concretely and say, okay, now I have a justification for going through the tumultuous beginning stage of doing this practice where I'm going to find out all sorts of things about my mind that I didn't want to find out.
Yeah,
Right. So, and
100%.
the other thing that you said that was really interesting, which I think is something worth touching on, is that there is a stage where you step back, you get a little bit of that space between being absorbed in content of your mind just moment to moment without even recognizing it, getting a little bit of that separation, being in awareness, consciousness, context, however you want to think about it, seeing things with a little bit more objectivity. And then there is a moment there where you realize that you're contributing to your own suffering, and you really have a decision in that moment of, do you want to take personal responsibility for where you are at from that perspective, right? This is a hard thing for people to do. And I'm curious, from just your personal experience, what was it at that moment that made you say, you know what, right now I'm going to accept where I'm at and I'm going to commit to this path forward. I recognize the value in it, even if I know it's not going to be easy, versus saying, oh no, it must be somebody else's job now to figure out what's going on with me so they can fix me.
I think there's like multiple layers there. The first is that I spent, so a lot of my burnout, depression, whatever you want. I think they're all shades of very similar things. It was an overactive mind, and then like honestly just fatigue that wasn't physical, right? But I had the urge, honestly, I'll just be straight up with everything I had going on. I had the urge to pee constantly. I had like weird like itchiness, like just
Mm.
weird physical sensations. I had fingertip pain, like stuff that didn't make any sense. But what it was is it started out as I felt heaviness in my legs.
Yep.
Uh and I And I started to be like, okay, so which is a symptom of like basically like continuous like fight or flight type of stuff where you're just like, yeah, like your things just become a little bit haywire, right? And I was, sleeping like okay, but not great. Like it wasn't waking up restful, which I also kind of think people get too into. Like, I'm not waking up restful. Like, I don't wake up perfectly feeling
Yeah.
amazing. I wake up feeling good.
Yeah.
But
Good enough.
yeah, like it's good enough. I mean, I'm not dead. That's good enough.
Right. We're here. We're doing it. So
Yeah, right. So, and then what kept happening is I was like, I literally spiraled. Like I like, do I have like, is this the start of MS? Which MS doesn't really occur that often in men, but like I was like starting to
True.
diagnose myself. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
do I need to go get an MRI? Like, what's going on? I had multiple times where I went to the hospital because I thought I was having some type of like either stroke. Like I had what I perceived to be left-sided stroke symptoms. Like I had numbness and tingling going down my left side of my body. I felt like my facial droop was like my face was drooping. And it's because I know what those symptoms look like. And my body was telling me to go home and freaking rest. My mind and my body were. And I was just pushing through doing work and, worried. It was 2020 also. I was like everywhere I go, I was putting a mask on and afraid that like I could be passing on COVID. There were so many things, right?
Yeah.
So your subconscious is very powerful. It just keeps trying to like make you go rest, and I could power through it, and to some degree, um, but then it just kept going worse and worse. And then I was so agitated. I was just like I could hold it together, but my wife would see me like really struggling, and I would like lash out like in weird ways that weren't me, right?
Hmm.
And then I started having like suicidal ideations, like honestly, even maybe worse than that was like erectile dysfunction. Like I was having all these
Yeah.
problems. It's like I'm not even a man anymore, right? And
Yeah.
so then I was trying to fix it. I was trying to fix it in a day. Like there's got to be one thing that will fix this. And
Yes.
then I got to this point where it's like, no, like it's just how you're living right now. And you're not living poorly. You just don't know how to live and treat yourself well. I also, dude, I don't think my self dialogue was probably super critical. Like, and I
Yes.
think it
Yes.
was. So
Yeah.
I didn't even like, I think I remember asking myself one time to like, do you love yourself? And I'm like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
And that sounds really cheesy and weird, but it's like, it was true. And then it did become kind of this, there was a sequence of events where I was like, I found a few resources that were like, okay, your nervous system. And one of them was Robert Sapolsky's Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, which is why one of the reasons I really freaking love that book. The other was Waking Up, and then the other was acceptance and commitment therapy, right? So
Mm.
accepting where you're at, creating values, and committing towards moving in the direction of your values. Um, and those they made sense to me, like from everything that I had like gone through, and it gave me a direction to go in, and at least some amount. Life is always uncertain, but if you have a path in front of you, and even if you're accepting that that path is uncertain, and it kind of gives you, like stepping into the unknown. It's kind of the classic hero's journey, right? Like you're stepping into the unknown and you're moving in the direction of your goals and aspirations, and that's powerful. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of the overarching arc there.
Okay. So I feel like you are loading ammunition into my gun right now. I don't know where we're shooting it, but you're loading it in. There's so many things to touch on this. First of all, what I would say, which is so super interesting here, is I'm because of the type of content that I make on YouTube, which attracts, and there was just a heron flying by my window, which is my favorite bird.
That's
Um,
cool.
he's back, thank God. Oh my God, my buddy. Anyways, okay, I'm distractible, but the nature of the content I put out does attract people who have medically unexplained symptoms, right?
Hmm.
And what you're talking about, there's so many layers to it, right? You're talking about this kind of sensation of heavy legs, and I can actually relate directly to that. That was one of the first things that I perceived. Um, you also talked about this perception that you were having this left-sided stroke, right? When I first started having issues myself, I was playing on a gig, playing upright bass, which is the left arm's up here like this, and right arm's doing the string thing. And I just kind of turned my head, and then all of a sudden, I just briefly kind of lost consciousness for just like a split second.
Yeah.
And pretty much immediately thereafter had what I know now to be a panic attack, right? But at the
Yeah.
time I didn't know. I was like, what's going on? Am I having a stroke? Like, am I dying? And for me, I have a history of undiagnosed congenital heart defect until I was 12, and I had open heart to prolong my life. So
Yeah.
there's an underlying current there, an undercurrent of fear
Yeah.
regarding health and undiagnosed medical conditions. So in that moment, my brain immediately goes into full on panic attack mode of I'm dying right now. What am I going to do about this? Right.
Yeah.
And sort of in the days and weeks thereafter, I experienced many of those same symptoms that you're talking about. So, changes in bowel and bladder, right? Difficulty walking, the feeling and perception that my weight of my body was more than it was, right?
Mhm.
And also like erectile dysfunction, like you're saying, left-sided arm weakness, just global weakness on the left side of my body. And, I'm feeling these things, I'm feeling weird sensations in my chest, and I'm thinking there's something really wrong here. And
Mhm.
just that dialogue in my head, there's something wrong, there's something wrong, there's something wrong going on here that nobody's picking up on. And then you go through all the medical appointments, and what it really was, looking back on it, similar to what you're saying, is I was living in a way, my lifestyle and my inner dialogue, that was not going to be conducive to having a nervous system that was even in a position to have some reserves, if you will.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
running that thing on empty, just redlining it all the time. And I was, the way I think of it now is like Icarus and flying too close to the sun
Yeah.
type thing. Because that's kind of exactly what happened. And I see this a ton with people who end up on um, consults, and everyone is hoping and praying that it's just going to be a lateral pelvic tilt or something.
Mhm.
And it's like, unfortunately, what we ultimately end up learning is that, first of all, we are never sure what it is. We end up
Yeah.
feeling better before we ever know, and then we never know, which is
Yeah.
frustrating, especially for those of us who are science-based, analytical, especially those of us in healthcare, because when we get better and then we don't know why, and we still can't say why, but then we're doing better, and we're cool with that uncertainty, it kind of freaks us out on a professional level if we think that we should be able to get some level of consistency in terms of diagnostics, treatment, intervention, results, outcomes, whatever. That's
Mhm.
something to accept, but that's we'll get to that in time. But what you end up realizing is like you can't just have this fire and then throw a cup of water on it and expect it
No.
to go out. You
Yeah.
really got to take a step back and start asking some tough questions. And I think, you know, for some of us, we may not know the biggest stressor that is actually underlying that until we do a whole bunch of random inquiry that ends up kind of feeling like throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. And,
Mhm.
you touched on Sapolsky's book, which I just recently read actually, which I was like, how did I miss this one? Uh,
Yeah.
but you touched on something really important here, which was the acceptance of uncertainty,
Yeah.
right? And I want to run something across your brain here and see how you respond to it. Okay. Because I've heard you talk about various things. So you mentioned acceptance and commitment therapy, which I think to me is in line with this idea of really saying, okay, this is what my experience is. I don't have to necessarily know what it is, but what I do have to do is accept that this is my experience.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, I honestly think that's probably the best possible advice that, you could give someone. It's like, don't try to change it. Just try to see what it actually is for real
Yeah.
and just commit to being fully accepting of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then also kind of see, are there things happening downstream from not accepting it that end up coming back around to bite you in the ass on the back end, right? So it's like, if that phone is captivating your attention, we can start to ask, what's the function of that? Right? Is it
Yeah.
to distract you from your experience right now in the present moment? If it is, it's not skillful to pick up that phone.
Yeah.
But if it's not, and you just want to scroll for 20 minutes on TikTok, go for it. Right?
Yeah.
So the function of what you're doing totally impacts the effect that it may have, right? Now,
100%.
so that's sort of like the looking straight at your experience and accepting it.
Yeah.
Then you go over to like the cognitive behavioral side, and there's a lot of, in a way, evidence seeking and reassurance seeking, right? You're saying, let me lay out all the possible evidence for this thought pattern that I'm having, or these underlying assumptions that might be below the thoughts, or the core beliefs that might be below theirs. And then let me kind of break those down and see, what do I have for or against that? And then once I look at that, can I break that belief down? Right. I don't think either one of these is the be all end all per se. I think for the right person at the right time, in the right circumstance, just like everything else. But how do you negotiate this difference when you're working with someone who you think a little bit of reassurance might be helpful for this person, or this person is seeking reassurance in order to avoid interacting with their experience in a more straightforward way?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And I think I don't have a perfect answer for it. I
Good.
think what I
Perfect.
definitely try to do is, you know, humans, the thing that helps humans the most is support, and like the appropriate amount of honestly challenge. And why I say the word challenge is because even like education is a challenge. Like, will you accept this? Right? Will you accept like that what I'm telling you is in your best interest, and is in your best is is what something that will help you move forward, right? And like, honestly, my business is centered around like barbell training and physical training, but it's very much like it's a yin and a yang. With when you challenge your body appropriately and you allow the appropriate recovery to happen, good things happen. And it's the same with your mind, right? Like, the amount of times we kind of briefly touched on it, where it's like I felt like I've been overwhelmed in a situation. When I first had 5 clients in my business, I was so overwhelmed with 5 clients. And now I'm like, I have way more than 5 clients and I'm doing fine. But that initial stage was like, can I keep this up? And like, oh, can this work? And it's like there's always these doubts, and you got to acknowledge the doubts, and then you got to push. You do have to move through. I got a pep talk from, I love my father-in-law. He gave me a pep talk when I was really low, and I did not respond to it well. Like, you don't know what I'm going through, you don't care, like that type of stuff. And then I realized, like, well, all he was trying to do was just use it was his way of saying like, I can do this, and it was my own inner dialogue that was saying like, I can't, right? And that's the hard part about validation versus invalidation, right? Like, I can love somebody and say, yeah, like, you're going through that, but like, you don't have to go through that forever. And that's not invalidating to their experience, in my opinion, because like, I can validate the fact that pain sucks, but I can also say that there's probably things you can do about it, right? Like, and the hard part about it is pain is super multifactorial, right? So like, it like, if you are not eating well and you don't feel good, and then you also have like knee pain, and you don't get outside, it's like, well, any one of those factors could be modified and your experience could improve, right? So like, bringing it all around to like, where's the entry point and how do we approach this? That's like, I always go back to this, like, we are emotional creatures first, right? What developed in we have our emotional centers that developed before, in evolutionary terms, and I'm not trying to be an evolutionary scientist, but this does make sense in my opinion. Like, emotions are what got us food, sex, safety, right? And
Yeah. All I
from an
want anyways.
animalistic standpoint, right? And then we put on this beautiful, awesome big brain on top of it, which is also our Achilles heel, right?
Yeah.
So you're emotional first, and you have to understand it's kind of the horse and the rider, or the elephant and the rider analogy. You have to, like, your autonomic and your subconscious is way faster than your cortical mind. Like, Thinking Fast and Slow is a great reference for this. I had read some of these books before I had these major depressive episodes, which is what I think helped me piece things together down the line, right? But it was realizing, like, okay, like, where am I at right now? Is this me? Is it purely kind of like cognitive behavioral therapy type of stuff, or is this like, just, I don't know how to even manage my emotions. I don't even know what my emotions are trying to tell me to. Like,
Mm.
the first time I cried, like, after I was going, or when I was going through this depressive episode, I felt really good. But it,
Yeah.
like, didn't solve the problem. It was probably just an indicator that I needed to start releasing my emotions and like figuring out what's going on with me, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so there's just like I always go back to like, okay, we have to address the thing, right? You can't run away from the problem. But first we got to know what the problem is, and you gotta kind of self-identify the problem. And then you also have to look at your environment. Like I have a few clients right now, like their job sucks.
Yeah.
Like they hate their job. It's significantly affecting their lifestyle and their happiness, but they can't do anything about it right now,
Yeah.
right? They need
Or
they
at
need
least
the
they
job.
believe it. Yeah.
At least they believe that, right?
Yeah.
So I could tell them to quit their job all day, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I will say, like, I think your job is contributing to this. Do you agree? Like, yes. I'm like, can you do anything about it right now? No. Okay. What can we do? Right.
Right.
And then
Right.
it's like, let's take some action towards managing it better. And if you're still in that job a year later, and if things have improved, then it's like, okay, good. If not, then it's like, all right, what we got to get out. We got to make a change, right? And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
your life, or it's your life or your job. And, and that's a hard thing to say to people, but it's true.
It is, and it's kind of funny to me sometimes. I go, you'd be better off changing your job, stop paying me, stop seeing me, and go train random shit on your own,
Yeah.
rather than hiring me to be the person who assists you in this futile project of trying to throw a glass of water on a forest fire. You
Yeah.
and with that being said, my whole perspective on that is like, if you have the proper mental and physical training, it dramatically increases, at least from a probabilistic standpoint, your ability to manage that same situation compared to yourself without that training, right? So,
100%.
when you're in that, this is something that was true for me. I got to a point where I just wanted to feel better. And I got
Yeah.
to a point where I was so afraid of doing anything that I stopped doing anything. And then I got so deconditioned that there was no amount of stress that wasn't going to push me over a threshold where my body was going to have a negative reaction. And I just got to the point where I realized that, because I was spiraling out. Like, I stopped training. I was avoiding everything possible. I got to the same point of kind of suicidal ideation. What's the point? That's when I found mindfulness. I had that moment. Locke Kelly talks about this in his book, and I had a very similar experience, which is like the voice is saying, I can't go on, I can't do this anymore. And then there's like another voice somewhere that goes, who said that? And then from there, that ignited my mindfulness kind of journey, because I realized I was going to need the mental resolve to make it through the initial period of training, of physical and mental training for that matter, and knowing that there were going to be probably way more setbacks, given the fact that those other stressors were either unknowns, right? Or weren't going to be able to be changed in a really short period of time. Like, I was in a job that I didn't like very much and was causing me a tremendous amount of stress, but
Mm.
did need to make that money and be in that job and get that training and get that experience. And it wasn't something that I could change. But at the same time, I said, okay, what can I do here? And even though I do know that it's probably going to suck for probably several months,
Yeah.
maybe a year, right?
Yeah.
Is it worth it? Because pragmatically speaking, what's the other option? And I think people get so into like this whole idea of there must be something else. There must be somebody who has the secret, where it's like, no, it's the obvious stuff right in front of you that maybe would become more obvious if you could just get a little bit of perspective and take a step back. But I think one of the things that I want to bring up here that people are struggling with under these circumstances is, when you take the big picture view, you can never be certain as to what is having what effect, unless you're looking back retrospectively and
Yeah.
saying, like for me, for example, when I quit that job, the perception of tension and pain that I was having in my body went from, like, let's say, an 8 out of 10 to a 4 out of 10 almost overnight. So that was like the proof in the pudding. My sleep got better, my shits got better, my dick got
Yeah.
harder. You know what I mean? Like, all the
Yeah.
good.
100%.
And that was like overnight, right? Could I have told you that that was having that level of an impact on me before that transition happened? Actually, probably not, right? I was still convinced, like, oh, there's probably some like sort of postural imbalance there. There's probably some sort of like mental imbalance there. And yes, sure there was, but it was responding to stress, and the underlying source of that stress was actually happening on more of an occupational level, which is, in my opinion, sort of a form of psychosocial
Yeah.
stress. And I think my mental skills at the time, I was so ill-equipped to deal with all the complex emotions that were coming up as I was treating patients, because they were triggering all these weird attachment related and sort of like
Yeah.
trauma related things that I had not even started to recognize were a problem for me. And it wasn't until later I started to, dive into different resources and recognize some of this stuff and work through it. And then all of a sudden notice now that, oh, when I talk to X person and they got this going on and it really triggers something in me, then I feel like really fatigued after that session. Or
Yeah.
I feel tension in my body and I get pulled down into some weird postural pattern when I'm doing that. What is that all about? Right. And get curious about it instead of judgmental about it. And then
Yep.
go, oh, what's there to see here? And that opens up this whole kind of realm of possibilities. But I think one thing underneath this all that is, let's say, a bottleneck for the majority of people is this feeling like I'm never going to know what it is. And if I don't know what it is, I can't control it. And if I can't be certain of it and I can't control it, then this thing always is going to have the power over me. Right. And people are operating from that belief. And it's just a belief.
Yeah.
Because you can have a ton of agency and a ton of your own willpower and control what you can control and control your acceptance of the uncertainty and then be as much of the master of your own domain as you could possibly hope to be. That's a much better outcome than sort of holding out for this like very uber specific certain fit the puzzle and the puzzle piece slot just perfectly or whatever it is that people are looking for. And so I guess one of my questions is like personally for you or with working with people, how do you get people to be able to live just a little bit in that uncertainty versus constantly trying to, let's say, tighten their grip around this thing that's going to fall out of their hands? Like I have the squishy toy thing here, and
Yeah.
it's one of those like weird things where you grip it, and the more
Yeah.
you grip it, the more it squeezes out, right? And
Yeah.
so, if you hold it gently in your hand and you don't grip it too hard, you can kind of like shake it all around, do whatever you want. But the second you start to actually like hold on to it, it starts to go away. And that's like a lot of the things that we're dealing with sometimes on the pain side.
I think like I always go back to, you know, there is showing up and doing what you say you will as best you can um is super powerful. Like the Four Agreements is one of my favorite books. I gift it to a lot of people because the Four Agreements they're a contract you can make with yourself, right? So um be impeccable with your word. And we know this. There's neuroscientific evidence that the way you talk, the language you use with other people and yourself has profound impacts on you, right? And the unfortunate part about it is it seems like a manipulation, right? But it's
Mhm.
really just really how you're going about the world, right? Um, the next one is so be impeccable with your word. Gosh, I know. Let's see. Don't take things personally,
Mhm.
right? And then I can never remember the third one. I know the fourth. The fourth is always do your best. Let's see. Um, yeah, I'm dying here on the third.
Oh,
I'll think.
the third agreement must be pretty insignificant.
It's but and the four, like, it really is be impeccable with your word. And don't take things personally because everybody's out there taking things personally. Like
Yeah.
even me, like the color of my thoughts today has been kind of a little bit fear oriented for some reason. It's a new month. Like
Mm,
like you're kind of like, is this month gonna, when you're in business for yourself, like you're kind of projecting all the time, right?
yeah.
And
That's a big one.
so you got to like learn to navigate that and trust it. And but all you can do is the best you can do. And like you have to ask yourself that, like, was that my best effort? And if it's not, then you have to figure out how to get better. And that's super scary. But ultimately, like, I do think life is a video game. And I don't mean like in some crazy we're in the Matrix way. I think life gets better when you level up, right? When you get like, think of all the things that if you would have told yourself that you were doing, if you would have told your 5-year-old self, like, hey, you're going to own a business, you're going to be doing a podcast, you're going to be driving a car, you're going to be doing all these things. Like 5-year-old, you would be like, no, I'm not. I'm living with my parents forever, right? I
Yeah,
hope, hopefully you had a good parental situation, right? But
I did. Yeah.
you're just stepping into the fear over and over again, right? So what can you do for yourself? Like figure out what would be a good day or a good week and show up. Like if you work in a job right now, work it as best you can. And if you don't like it, then go find another one. It's
Yeah.
Earl
Two
Nightingale like has a great like Earl Nightingale was like a motivational speaker in the 50s, and he's like, do the best where you are and life will get better, right? And it's that simple. And that's
Yeah.
kind of like a thing that started to resonate. But then you also have to develop all these skills that you've talked about and that I think are they're important skills.
Yeah.
Like communicating with yourself well, realizing that you're not your thoughts, realizing that curiosity is a much better strategy than being judgmental, right? Navigating and just seeing that your emotions are often just like things that you probably developed as coping mechanisms when you were a kid, because that's when a lot of this stuff develops. And it doesn't mean it's anybody's fault.
No.
It's nobody's fault. It's
Right.
just the world. It's
Just
just
is.
humans.
It happened.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. All random. We're going to get into a couple of things here before we wrap up. The third agreement for anyone watching is don't make assumptions.
Yes. Thank you. Gosh.
I Googled
Like
it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Something that you touched on there, I think is super important is the gaming aspect, like looking at life as a game. That makes it way more curious and way lighter and a lot more fun. And I've heard you talk about sort of making it more of a play oriented approach, and I think that's something that's super powerful. One of the things that you just touched on that I think is an important distinction to make, especially for the chronic pain crowd, is there is this very subtle difference between leveling up, asking yourself if you're doing your best versus trying to be perfect. Because
Yes.
oftentimes, what is actually your best, your most optimal operating point, is actually where you are not being perfect, but you're getting stuff done and you're doing good enough, right? And this was something that for me was incredibly hard to understand because I was burning myself out trying to be perfect. And it was hard for me to accept that being good enough and leaving more energy in my tank to be more consistent across my interactions and to be able to recover and enjoy my life was actually ultimately going to be a higher level of playing the game than trying to be perfect in all my interactions. And I see a lot of people who are struggling in the work burnout situation that we were talking about as struggling with the perfectionism piece of it. And they're trying to just like cross all the T's and the I's. And that email is taking them 45 minutes to write instead of 5 minutes. And the question that I always ask in that for myself when I'm in that situation is, why am I doing this? What is the function of this action? What is the function of this behavior right now? Right? Is this me trying to level up and be my best self? Right? Or is this me trying to increase certainty in an uncertain circumstance and try to control the outcome rather than just controlling my contribution to it? Right?
Yeah.
Or my process, my actions. And I stopped making outcome goals quite a long time ago. And I think it's similar to what you were talking about, earlier on, where some people who just are showing up to train and they're in the process of training are way more satisfied with their training than people who are chasing a number. Right. And I think the people who stay in the game of chasing the number for a long, long time and don't end up like quitting or burning out are probably actually those that are also engaged in the process and enjoying it. And then the numbers are kind of happening as a secondary consequence of going through that. Right. And I think honestly, regardless of what your kind of movement or performance related goals are, if you can set the process as the goal, the outcomes start to take care of themselves. So, like on the pain side, I always try to get people to say, okay, how would you know that you were where you wanted to be in terms of being able to do an activity, something functional, something participatory, something that you could enjoy? Like, how
Mhm.
would you actually know specifically, not just like feel better, right? That's super vague. How
Yeah.
about we tie it to something specific? Could you go on a hike and do that with your family and be present for it because you're not so distracted and overwhelmed by focusing on your pain while you're doing it, for example, right? And it's like then we can start to say, okay, what are the qualities we need to be able to do those activities? How can we get actions from those and then take those actions, make the action the goal, right? And then as long as we're checking that off, we got to be satisfied with the outcome regardless of what it is, right? Because we don't get to control the way the body responds, right? The brain's perception of its environment is the body's response, and
Yeah.
we don't necessarily get to change that on our time frame. That's
Yeah.
something that changes on the time frame of the universe, right?
Yeah.
We just control certain inputs and outputs, based on our knowledge and based on our skills.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like there's so much that's really um useful and like it resonates very well with everything you just said, and it really is just like you know, knowledge and acceptance are a power, and then honestly like a realistic optimism in the face of, honestly, dude, Greg, I think this is a huge one. You're gonna die.
Yeah, yeah,
we're,
yeah.
we're gonna die, and the more you just accept that you're gonna die, because what people are afraid of a lot of times is that they're gonna have to live the rest of their life with their pain, right? And
Oh,
like
oh,
so what you got to do is say, I'm gonna die soon.
yeah,
I'm 35. If I get, hopefully I get 45. I would love to live to like 90, right? Or
yeah,
100, you
sure.
know, but it really does come from how we're conditioned to think about like death, right? Like in certain, if you're like, you got to earn an afterlife, you're going to view your life differently and you're going to be more perfectionistic, right? If you don't know what is going to happen, which is where a lot of people are at these days, you're
Yes,
living in this fear of uncertainty and
yes,
fear that this is all you have, right?
right,
And so you got to navigate that. And like
right.
this is shit that I couldn't talk to patients about, but it's like true, like,
Yeah,
because then we can start to craft, we can craft a life that you want to live based on your values and your orientation, right? And then
yeah,
we can say, what will make you, if you could do this, would you feel good, right? If I could go for a hike with my family and not worry about like, having to hold everybody back, because that's what a lot of it is too.
mm,
It's all these other things that
yeah,
are just more,
status.
and so, and then we can start to navigate those things, and then we can tackle things head on, right? I think one of the hard parts we're in is you can search for a reason for everything. And sometimes you will find it, most of the time you will not. you know, and the more you just like, like the power of now, tapping into the present moment and being present and like smiling, putting a smile in your mind. And like when I was first kind of coming out of my state, you know, like I learned to just like zone out and like smile, and it felt good. And I'm like, I trusted that that was something that I needed to continue to do, right? And then I trusted that like the things that I love are playing sports with my buddies. And I also, this is probably maybe my most profound lesson, is like there's probably been, I hope there's been a time in your life that things felt good for you, right? Doesn't mean that it was like perfect, but like physical therapy school for me was, I went back to school. I was a little bit older than everybody in class,
Mm,
but we played intramural sports. We played basketball like 3 times a week. I was lifting weights. I was learning all the time, which I love to learn, right? And I had meaningful social relationships. I eventually started to date my now wife, and things got really, really good, right? And I was like, okay, that's a recipe. How do I recreate that recipe as best possible for me? And it doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. I don't have as much connection to my buddies as I used to have, which is something that you got to work on. But like playing sports, moving my body, learning, engaging in meaningful activities, being a good partner as best possible. Like none of this is perfect. Like I'm an asshole sometimes,
oh, good.
My name's Strength and Kindness, and it's mostly because I orient around like I'm trying to be kind. Otherwise I could just be a giant turd, right? So like that's the stuff you got to do, is you got to figure out your recipe and then bake it. And if it doesn't turn out exactly right, bake another one and just keep
Yeah,
doing that. And
take it
it's going to
again.
take you, yeah,
Yeah,
it's going to take you where it's going to take you to a better place, right? And
yeah,
but every time you do that, you're going to get a little bit better at it. And
yeah,
it's hard for people because it does suck to work through these problems, but there's a way out. Like Alan Gordon's book, The Way Out,
yeah.
is
So good.
really profound, right?
Yeah, that was a
Um,
great one.
yeah, and
Couple of
yeah,
things. Circling back, the fear of death is something that I think is related, or let's say the fear, right, is something that's related to the fear of death, right? So it's like we won't experience death until we experience it. what we're really afraid of is the thought of death, right?
Yeah.
It's a funny thing when we really break it down, because those of us who are afraid of death, and I am in that category quite strongly.
Yeah.
Um, when I my whole orientation towards my life is like, I need to achieve this, I need to get this done, I need to make the most of this life. And the first thing that crossed my mind when I first started having um, symptoms was, and I had weird stuff like mainly derealization symptoms, which I
Yeah.
perceived as being a visual or vestibular problem, because I know too much about anatomy and went through like the medicalization process through the medical system.
Yep.
Well, I have a point that I really want to pick your brain on in a second on that one. But, anyways, so I went through that when I started having those feelings, those symptoms. The feelings that came with them was like, I cannot be in this state forever, because first of all, I can't perform at the level that I want to if I'm in this state, right? I mean, I am a world class upright bass player at this point in my life, and I'm like, if I can't hear with my ears the way I'm used to, and see with my eyes the way I'm used to, and hold my left side of my body in the way I'm used to, and have coordination and feel light in my body and feel powerful and explosive and present and tuned in, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this. I rely on all these faculties so much. Existential level threat, right? Because the downstream from that ends up looking something like, if I can't be a world class bass player, which is what I'm in school for, how I have friends, how I make money, how I like get basically social currency, then what happens? Well, then I'm kicked out of the tribe. Well, then what happens when I'm kicked out of the tribe? Then I die. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So what is this really a fear of? It's a fear of death, right? And that ended up being the undercurrent of nervous system dysregulation, and ultimately what I look back on now, I'm like, oh yeah, that was a major depressive episode for sure. Um, I didn't know it at the time, because
Yeah.
again, I was going through more of the medical workup, and they were like, oh, this kid seems psychologically, intact. So we're going to go down like the route of ordering 20 different tests from 20 different specialists, and like diagnosing some like rare form of migraine, and then ultimately like prescribing some sort of a tricyclic antidepressant, at the end anyway. So it was a funny process, but working through it over the years, what I realized is there is a profound fear of the feeling of fear itself.
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of like, I mean, I'm not necessarily secretive about this, but I like to smoke a little bit of weed from time to time. And for those of us who have partaken in the sacrament, we know that there can be a paranoia element to it. And some people, when they feel paranoia, they lean into the paranoia and they go, "Oh, what the hell is that? That's like a weird void thing going on. Let me lean in." When I feel paranoia, I wanna do anything I can not to feel that, right? Because that feeling, which can't harm me, if I just feel it, it's fine, it's totally fine. But
Yeah.
feeling that feeling feels like a void, and
Yeah.
feeling that void feels like death. And so anything in the realm of that kind of a feeling is something that I am 100% avoiding, right? Now, what also feels like that is the emptiness and simultaneous completeness of consciousness itself. The other thing that feels kind of like that is love, is true compassion and really deep love. All of the
Mm.
things that I struggle tremendously to feel, because
Yeah.
the intensity of the experience of feeling those things is so great, right?
Yeah.
So I think some of us, whether we choose to or not, we come into contact with some of these things in our lives. And the way that our nervous system responds to those can be one of either, okay, I'm stepping into this and facing it, or let me numb out everything here so that the overall intensity of my experience is reduced so I can control it and feel a little bit safer, while simultaneously making the thing which I'm resisting persist into my life and be more present for as long as you were going to avoid that other thing, right?
Yep.
And I look at this sort of very bluntly right now as, hey, if you don't want to feel pain, you're never going to feel joy. So
Yeah.
accept it. Do you want to feel more or feel less? Because that's kind of the question here. Do we want to experience life fully or not? Right. And obviously,
Yeah.
there's like a more nuanced conversation around maybe graded exposure from that perspective, and
Yeah.
not always jumping straight into the deep end. But I think
Yeah.
in some ways it's like you get to decide if you wanna watch a black and white movie or a color movie, right? But the content of what's in that movie is not necessarily gonna be comfortable for you, at
Yep.
all times, and it's something that, I think for a lot of people that I work with, it's the fear of fear itself, which ultimately kinda comes back down to the fear of death and people trying to find that certainty,
Yep.
right? To, "Oh, this is gonna make me whole." It's like, "No, probably not." It's probably not gonna make you whole. What's probably gonna make you whole is nothing ever, sorry,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But the thing that's probably gonna come the closest to it is the exact level of experiential intensity that you're trying to avoid.
Yeah. It's I mean, where your attention goes, like life flows, right? Like that's just an iteration of the kind of the central dogma of neuroscience, right? But like if your life will only be this big if you're only focusing on what's wrong, right? But when you accept everything, life gets really big. And yeah, the only like nothing's gonna make you like I think this is just the human experience is like there is nothing that's going to like create enough certainty for us to like manage it like easily because it's not easy. Life's not supposed to be easy, right? Like that's why like the construct of like you have to find something to suffer for is such a profound and like somebody's like, yeah, that makes sense. Or like why stoicism has survived 2,000+ years is because from a philosophical standpoint, it seems to really resonate. And like we're almost confirming like stoic stuff
In
with
neuroscience.
neuroscience,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And it's like that's to things that people knew 2,000+ years ago, and the things that stick around are things that we should pay attention to. Sometimes because they're bad, and sometimes when they're like because like they're unfortunately they're super good, but people still aren't paying enough attention to, right? So it's like their yin and the yang is so profound too because it's like you go through a high and then you're gonna go through a low and like trying to avoid the low is negating your ability to receive the high of life, right? And that's like it's you have to accept that. I mean, the most powerful analogy that my buddy who I leaned I know a buddy really hard when I was low. He's a psychiatrist, brilliant guy. And like I didn't understand what was going on to me. And I used him to help me, right? And I also I wanted reassurance and he never gave it to me.
yeah, there it is. Yeah,
And he never and it was I was like, dude, why don't you just tell me that I'm gonna be okay? He's like, because I don't know. Like
yeah, I don't
I
know.
think I think you're gonna get on the other side of this, but I don't know, dude.
Yeah,
And but he's like, you are drowning in the waves of your experience right now.
yeah,
And this is why I want to learn to surf because he's like, you just got to learn to ride the waves. And once you learn to ride, I'm like getting the tinglies right now because it's like when you learn to ride the waves, you'll gain the confidence to get back on the board after you fall off, right? Or you're going to learn that there's going to be turbulent ones, there's going to be calm ones, but you just ride them. And it's I would be bullshitting you if I'm like I'm not afraid of death because like I freaking love the experience of life and
yeah,
I love the possibility of the days ahead and I want to experience all these things, right? But I do think about death probably every day, and I think that helps. Where a lot of my grief was stemming from is I was working in nursing homes during 2020 and I literally was seeing people like I was having visualizations of me basically in a wheelchair in a nursing home, just the way that people in a men like
yeah, like an asylum.
like well either psych or just a memory unit, right?
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, you mean like a med
And
just
I worked with a guy who at the beginning of the summer was 6'6", in pretty had his faculties, but he had early stage like dementia type stuff. In 3 months, his faculties were like almost diminished just because he a lack of normal routines and staying in his home and probably watching too much news, and he deteriorated that fast. And
yeah,
I was at the same time, I didn't know how to process it. I was just trying to go in and be uplifting or positive, and I wasn't feeling anything. And then I'm like, then it just hit me. It just bubbled up in a lot of
yeah.
different ways.
It's
So,
interesting. I have somebody I've been working with for a while who has had an extraordinarily similar experience. They were working in a rehab capacity at the same time, similar experience, and it's interesting. It's like, I never liked working in the hospital for those very reasons. I'm extremely sensitive to that sort of stuff. But literally just the other day, I'm like, there's I could feel that there's just some underlying dysregulation here, and I'm kind of trying to like push through it with a lot of motion, like just staying busy and doing stuff, whatever. And then I, lay down for this nap, and I don't know what inspires it, but I'm laying down for a nap, which is rare for me, and I'm like, I think I just need to meditate a little bit. So it starts off like I'm going into just okay, I'm like becoming aware of my thoughts. Now I'm letting awareness become aware of itself. Wow, awareness is really spacious right now. Damn, you know what else is spacious? Space. You know what else is spacious? Never ending expansion of space and time until maybe it doesn't and then goes the other way, or who knows? Uncertainty. That's spacious.
mhm,
And then from there, it just kind of naturally went into like a death thing. And then it went into a visualizing myself on my own deathbed thing. And then it brought me into like a Joseph Goldstein exercise of visualizing yourself on your deathbed.
yep,
And I was finally able to just sort of see like, man, what I'm afraid of is the thoughts of death, right?
yeah,
The anticipation of it. And I'm letting the avoidance of just feeling those feelings that are associated with those thoughts. I'm letting that hold me in certain patterns in my day-to-day life that are actually not in alignment with what my values are, and they're not actually in alignment with what I want my life to be. Right. And like we always have to have these moments of recalibration where we, get lost in the sauce and then we kind of take a step back and then we go, wait, are the big picture things that I said I was setting out to do actually what I'm acting in alignment with? Or am I like serving something else for some other reason that I might not even understand right now? And
yeah,
sometimes, you take a core fear for yourself and you look it straight in the face. And then all of a sudden, nervous system calms down, you get some perspective, and you're able to go, oh, okay, I'm going to quit doing that. I'm going to quit doing that. And now, whether or not you can actually enact that change, that's like a whole different thing. But it's building in those moments of exposure in your life, figuring out what those triggers are and tackling them head on that eventually allows you to have that experience. Now, before we're going to wrap up soon, but I got one kind of last thread I want to ask you about.
yeah,
Okay. You mentioned I think at some point in this talk, you had mentioned something about we were talking about Sapolsky's book, which is when zebras don't get ulcers, and you were also talking about your experience with depression and sort of feeling like less of a man as
mhm,
that was going on, just with like the not feeling strong, not feeling like you had your energy, those sort of things, and you also touched on one point about being in PT school, having the recipe, as you said, which was having like really good social support, interaction with your buddies. You're dating your now wife. At the time, you were learning a lot. And right now, it's an interesting thing for me. This could be a bias in the sample size of the sample of people that I work with, but I work with a lot of men.
mhm,
And um, if you look at the literature on chronic pain overall, you'll see that it tends to bias on average towards more female than
mhm,
male individuals. But what I'm seeing, and who knows, this could be just a bias of my sample, but I'm seeing a ton of men who are suffering from this experience of chronic pain. And when I talk to them, it seems like they're missing either the social support element, they're not in alignment with what they wanna do in their lives, they don't feel fulfilled in what they're doing. No, this is not a thumbs up. I don't know why I did a thumbs up. Is this gonna make me, freeze up right now? Of
oh,
course it
no,
I don't know. We'll see. Hold on, I'll probably come back, right?
there
Yeah,
you go,
I
you're
came
back,
back. Okay, cool, cool. We got a new camera link thing. Um, or I find that maybe they've been in a job that allows them to have some level of status amongst their peers, but then on a physical level, on a fitness level, they don't feel like a strong, confident protector, right? So they get the provider part taken care of, but they don't really have the protector part. They don't feel like they're a man from that perspective. and then they don't have the social support. And I think this is something that maybe is just a men's problem, generally speaking.
Mhm.
Um, what is your take on the current state of men?
Oh man, you went really deep there. I think, we there's a lot of things I could get into. I was just even thinking about we got the whole Taylor Swift. People are criticizing Taylor Swift, and then women are kind of fighting back because it's like she's just, and like so much of this is just drama for the sake of drama. Like I freaking am for women doing whatever women want to do, right? And I am for men connecting with themselves on an emotional level, because I think unfortunately what men do instead of doing that is they drink, they eat, they
Mm,
like become people that they don't feel good because they never address their emotional health, right? And I think your emotional health, and I don't even know if that's the best way to put it, but like your like learning to open up with my wife has been very significant for our relationship. Like I'm straight up honest about this. We still fight. That's because the point of it is not that we're trying to avoid conflict, it's that we manage conflict better, right? And it feels good to sort it out and come back to a place where we care about each other as opposed to like suppressing things. And I think it's the same thing with men here. I think a lot of it is, so if you look at I'm always going to say this. There is a cognitive, physical, and emotional piece to the pain puzzle. Like, when it comes to why it's so prevalent in the female population is because women have been told to suppress their lives for a long time. And there's just so many aspects to being a woman in society that tends to internalize frustration, and then we have
mm,
to figure out what our discomfort is about, right? For men, it probably resonates more with like alcoholism and erectile dysfunction type of things. But I'm sure if you've I'm sure read like John Sarno, there's multiple examples of like guys with back pain who, once they went to psychiatry and started to just kind of manage their life better, their back pain got better,
yeah.
right? And I think men are just like less robust than women, or like we have less robust imagination. So it's either like, well, my boner doesn't come up, or I'm not playing like, like women are like, yeah, what's wrong with me on this deeper level, where men are like, well, I can't procreate, and I don't feel very strong, and that's all I got because we're dumb apes, right? So it's like, okay, figure out what you care about, and like the reason that physical training is so awesome is because if you allow it to be, it's your own journey, right? Like it's just you versus you. If you want to run, if you want to lift, if you want to cycle, like you got to humble yourself and do the work. And then that often growth leads to more growth. Once you start to pursue a physical pursuit, it might teach you to do more, of a mental pursuit or whatever, right? And I think everybody's just we are like in an era where your attention, this is probably a good place to wrap up, but like your attention is being pulled. It's a game of escalation, right? Where, okay, it used to be that all you needed to advertise McDonald's cheeseburgers was just like two golden arches and like, hey, we've sold 99 billion burgers, right? Now it's like literally the commercial is so intense that like it makes you want a freaking burger, right? And like literally we're not probably too far away from injecting smells with advertising because we just are bombarding people's senses, right? So like we're just always being triggered and we don't even realize it. So men are being triggered with politics and sports and sex. Like, I mean, everything is sex. There's
Yeah.
some like, you go on Instagram and it's like, and I'm not, this isn't a negative thing, but like my content would be blowing up if I was an attractive woman with a nice butt. Like it,
Yeah.
that's just the
True.
nature of it. And I'm not mad about that.
Right.
But like,
I've seen that butt before, man. On the power clean stuff like that. It's not too bad.
but I mean, it's frustration. It's frustration and thinking that the grass is going to be greener or that life should be easier. And we internalize that and it turns us, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't address things that are physical, right? You address the physical, address the cognitive, address the emotional. Don't put don't put gasoline on a fire that's burning, right? Figure out how to deprive it of oxygen over time. And I think a lot of it's just fear and frustration. Like if I was walking around downtown where we live thinking about how every guy out there could kick the shit out of me because I'm not tough and I'm not strong. That wouldn't bode very well for me from a stress standpoint, right? But
Well,
luckily I've stopped doing that.
yeah, and I think there's two components to that, right? Which is, first of all, just understand that that's like a thought you have, right? And that's
Yep.
like an actual concern you have. Accept that. That's good, right? And then maybe do something about it too. Like not just on the thought side, but also get stronger.
Yeah.
Make yourself feel more confident because at the end of the day, it's like, one book that I just read that you've been talking about forever is when how Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert
Yeah.
Sapolsky. And
Yeah.
one of the things he talks about is the impact of that social stress and where we rank, within sort of our little tribes, if you will. And
Yeah.
a low ranking male has a lot of social stress. And so I think with men these days, it's hard because they might not feel empowered to really take the action to take control of their life because they're kind of between maybe like an old guard and a new guard kind of switch over. They're like, wait, am I supposed to feel my feelings or push them down? The old
Yep.
generation said never feel them. The new generation says feel them, but like the girls don't like the guys who have the feelings, or at least I don't think so, right? And it kind of mucks this whole thing up. But at the end of the day, from a pragmatic standpoint, if you can take control of the cognitive, emotional, and physical aspects of your health, take actions and work towards that and try to build those positive social networks and support systems, that's ultimately what's going to be most beneficial for your long-term health, regardless of who you are, man, woman, or whatever. But
Yeah.
I think for men right now, they need to hear that message maybe more than ever because there's a lot of confusion
Yeah.
around exactly what to do about it. And I just, you know, when I see content like yours, I go, I think this is where a lot of young men could be putting their attention on things like Stoic philosophy, on things like weightlifting, sort of mindset, healthy relationships, all this stuff. It's, you can't, it's the importance of it is not overstated. And speaking of overstated, I've kept you too long already. So why don't you go ahead and just tell everyone where they can find you, what you're up to, what projects you're doing, all that sort of stuff, whatever you want to say.
Yeah, so I appreciate this has been super fun. We obviously went really deep, which is good. I love that. So I'm Dave Hagerty. I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I'm a strength coach. I run strength and kindness coaching and rehab. Um, I coach powerlifters, Olympic weightlifters. I really coach anybody who wants to get stronger, and build confidence and have fun in this process. You can find me at Dave.strength and kindness on Instagram. I've got a YouTube channel. It's Strength and Kindness is my YouTube channel. Gonna get into podcasting. You've inspired me here. But yeah, it's just I'm trying to have as much fun as possible while helping people and spreading the message that, like you said, you got to take care of yourself holistically, and that means physical, mental, and to some extent emotional training. Which emotional training is probably just play. You need to play more. So that's where I'm at.
Hell yeah. All right, Dave. Well, thank you so much for jumping on. It's been a real one, and you're inspiring me to make it past episode 2 to episode 3. So
Yeah.
hopefully, when you get yours booted up, we can come on and have another one of these talks.
I like it.
All right.
Get 3 on the books. All
Oh
right.
yeah. All right. We'll see you.